Hello everyone. This talk is especially for children who are studying local history in Eastbourne. And this is all about the pier. And I'm calling it a pier for many purposes. And I hope you'll find out why as we go through. This is the original drawing of the pier. This is how they wanted it to look. And the idea of the pier came about in round about the 1860s. And work was actually started in 1868. And it took 4 years to build. And you can see it's sort of very simple. There's nothing fancy about it at all. And here's a nice little picture of when they're just a part of the way through, and you can see they're beginning to build out into the sea. And a few facts. It was designed by a chap called Eugenius Birch, and I think that's a lovely name, Eugenius, because whenever anybody wants to talk to him, they say, "Hey, Eugenius." And I think that's quite clever. And he was said to be the best pier designer, the best architect in the country. And Eastbourne was really quite lucky to have such a good designer building their pier. It was exactly 1,000 feet long, or 305 metres. As I say, completed within 4 years, so 1872, and the cost was just £15,000, perhaps the cost of a small new car these days. It's funny how the value of money changes. Now, this first pier, as I say, was very simple. You can see it was just a boardwalk. And this was very unusual for the Victorians because they weren't used to walking across the water like this. And some people found it quite difficult to get used to. And they used to say that in particular, ladies used to go a bit dizzy. And it's said that some of them needed smelling salts to stop them from feeling dizzy. So here's a more modern picture. And this gives a clue. Look at the arrow, as to why the pier was built in the first place. It was built so that passengers could walk from the seashore out to where these really quite large pleasure steamers were moored, because these steamers were so large they couldn't come in right to the beach, so the passengers had to go out to them. So really the pier was just a means of reaching these pleasure steamers, which were really quite popular at the time. And here's another picture of the end of the pier, and you can see the landing stages there where the steamers were moored up. And here's a picture of one of the earlier steamers. You can see it's absolutely crammed out with people. It's a very popular thing to do. And the first steamer to operate out of Eastbourne was called the Rapid, which was a bit of a silly name, really, because it was very, very slow, but never mind. And here's a more modern paddle steamer, just moored off the end of the pier. And people here would perhaps take a trip to Brighton or Hastings on the steamer and then perhaps come back by train. But there were times when there were special trips right across to France, and you could go to France and back again on a day trip. And the cost would be just half a guinea, which in today's money would be 52 pence. So that doesn't sound a bad deal, does it? Now, the first disaster of the pier came just 5 years after it was built. New Year's Day, 1877, an absolutely massive storm whipped up, and the great big waves crashed on the underneath of the pier near the beach, and you can see totally smashed it to smithereens. So really a major disaster. And really the problem is that the half of the pier nearest the beach had been built too low, because otherwise, those waves wouldn't have affected it. And so when the pier was rebuilt, and it was done really quickly, in just over a year, they built the new bit, the bit nearest the beach, at a higher level. And you can see a modern picture here where you can see that difference in levels, and again here. And when you actually walk along the pier these days, you do actually go from the high bit to the low bit, because halfway along you might notice a big slope going down about 2 metres. Now this is one of the earlier pictures of buildings beginning to appear at the end of the pier. Originally, there was a tent, a canvas structure, which was very cold and very drafty, where holidaymakers in the afternoon only, because they didn't have electric light, could listen to comedians and listen to songs and see some dancers. It was like a small variety show or a music hall. And then 10 years later, this is round about 1890, this sort of better wooden structure was built, not quite as drafty, but again, not exactly brilliant, was it? And here you can see a picture of the whole pier at this time with that structure at the end. And then a little bit later on, and we're talking about sort of round about 1900 now, you can see the beginnings of really quite a handsome building going up at the end of the pier. And look here at the front of the pier entrance, and look how that changes over time. So in 1912, they put in a new set of suite kiosks and turnstiles and things for people to pay their entrance fee onto the pier. And then a lot later, we get to about 1950, and the whole pier entrance is totally rebuilt and changes again into a more modern style. And then something like another 40 years, get up to about 1990, you get the sort of pier entrance that you see and that we have today. So in terms of other structures that started to be built, first of all, there was a very rough and ready bandstand. I don't think this is very much to write home about, but at least it was a start. But then before too long, something far more decorative and really, I suppose, almost glamorous in a way, in Edwardian times, this new bandstand was built. And you can see how popular it was. You can see on the right-hand side all those people sitting down listening to the band. And on the left-hand side, all the people were looking down and at something else. See, all the people on the pier and all the people on the beach were watching the Eastbourne Regatta. This was a race of rowing boats that took place each year. And you can see, very, very popular. I mean, the crowd's almost as big as Airborne, really. And the pier, of course, was a brilliant place to stand to actually see all the rowing boats racing along. And here's a nice picture from the early 1900s, and you can see what's appeared now is two games salons, as they called it. On the left-hand side, you've got really a small bowling alley, and on the right-hand side, you've got a rifle shooting saloon. I don't think they were real rifles. I think they were air guns or something. And you can see the people promenading on the pier. That was always very popular, just sort of going for a gentle walk. And even though it's a sunny day, you can see the shadows on the ground. A lot of the ladies actually had umbrellas because they didn't actually like being in the sun. They wanted to keep their skin sort of pale and not having the sort of suntan that they have today. And this is interesting, part of the pier was actually roped off for people to do roller skating. Roller skating was very popular at this time. In fact, roller skating in England actually started here in Eastbourne. And then if you wanted to see something different, this was a professional diver who would dive off the pier in all sorts of clever moves, and people would actually pay money. I think they passed a hat round to see him performing. Now, right at the end of the pier, sort of looking back, I think it's a very pretty sort of building. And you can see all the tea rooms there. I think they spent a lot of effort actually making a good design out of this. And you can see behind it a new theatre. And this was built just before 1900, and it accommodated 1,100 people. So really quite a size, and people could go there to see plays and various shows, etc. And the shows like this sort of carried on really right up until 1970. And you notice that the performances are now in the evening as well as the afternoon. And the reason for that, of course, is because at long last, electric light came to the pier, and this was all installed round about 1900, so that the pier could actually be used in the evening as well as just during the daytime. And the pier, of course, was a very busy place. The pier entrance was an ideal meeting place because people who were new to Eastbourne didn't know where to go. They said, oh, where should we meet our friends? Oh, we'll actually meet them at the pier. And everybody knew where the pier was because, of course, it's on the seafront. And as soon as you get to the seafront, you can't miss something that goes 1,000 feet out into the sea. And it's also a very important point for people boarding buses and that sort of thing. And you can see a picture of one of the first Eastbourne motor buses with the people sitting on the upper deck. And in front of it, you can see a horse-drawn bus, because at this time, there weren't that many motor buses about. And people could have a choice of the two. And then later on, this is in the 1920s, these yellow buses, or charabancs as many people call them, would take people out on little afternoon trips to tea rooms, etc. And these buses, because they were bright yellow, were called the Eastbourne Canaries. 1925, and a lot of work taking place on the pier to widen it. And this was being done to make way for this large building that was added. And this, of course, was fairly near to the prom itself. And this was actually built as a music pavilion for concerts. So you had theatre and shows at one end and music concerts at the near end of the pier. And later on, just after the war, this was turned into a ballroom. So holiday makers could come and actually dance to the sound of a big band. And then during the war itself, this was almost the third disaster for the pier, but not quite. There was an idea to actually blow up the pier, because they were very, very worried about Germans invading and using the pier for landing craft, etc., to bring the soldiers ashore. And they thought, well, if we blow up the pier, they won't be able to use it. But the pier was really so important to Eastbourne, they sort of came to a different sort of decision. And you might notice just behind this gun and where the soldiers are, there are a couple of men working, actually taking up the floor of the pier. So that's in fact what happened. You can see in this picture there's a gap. Quite deliberately, so that any invading army can't actually use the pier, because you can't get from one end to the other. And the pier, of course, in more modern times has been used for fishing off the end of the pier, always very popular. For speedboat rides, you could hire a speedboat for 20 minutes or so. And there was an idea at one time to have a hovercraft service, but I think that proved to be too expensive and didn't quite turn out the way that it should. Now, this lovely building here, this is the Pier Theatre and Tea Rooms. Right at the top there, that dome, is a camera obscura. And this is really quite an unusual thing. This is very popular with the Victorians and Edwardians. It was a special little room that you could go into and see a shallow white dish, and a lens would project the picture of all the surrounding area, right from the top of the pinnacle there, onto this dish. And it was really quite fascinating, and the one in Eastbourne, I think, was one of the largest in the country. So really quite an unusual feature, but still part of all the attractions that the pier had to offer. The building itself is made of wood. It's not made of stone, it's not made of brick, because that would be far too heavy, and it would really cause the pier really to sink, I suppose. So they used wood because it was very much lighter. The only problem is that wood burns. And this is where we come to pier disaster number 2. 1970, a major fire in the Pier Theatre really destroyed the inside of the building, but the firemen really managed to retain most of the outside of it. And the building itself was never used as a theatre again, but was used as a disco and a nightclub from time to time. And then the third pier disaster, another fire, I'm afraid. This was just 10 years ago, where this building that had become a ballroom and later on became a massive amusement arcade. The amusement arcade, as you can see, burning fiercely, and really that was all that's left of it. And of course all that scrap metal was taken down, and some smaller buildings have now taken their place. So the pier has been used for a number of things. It started out for passengers getting onto paddle steamers. You could go for speedboat rides, you could go fishing, you could watch variety shows at the theatre, you could watch music concerts at the Music Pavilion, which then became a dance hall and then an amusement arcade. You could just go on the pier and sunbathe, of course. You could listen to the brass band, you could visit the tea rooms and the pubs, if you're old enough, of course. You could go to the disco and the nightclub. You could just go for a stroll or walk to the end of the pier and look back and have a wonderful view over the whole of Eastbourne seafront. And you could go roller skating, as you saw. And it was also a really good meeting place. And the pier hasn't just been used for people, it's been used for other things as well. And this is a massive swarm of starlings that you see very often just before sunset, particularly in the autumn, swirling around in lovely patterns. And the smart word is called a murmuration of starlings. And after they finish all their swirling about, they settle down underneath that pier building out of the worst of the weather. So another thing that Eastbourne Pier is really quite famous for. So to sum up, the pier was built to help passengers get to the ships anchored offshore. This left a lot of wasted space that was gradually filled by other buildings aimed at giving people leisure and pleasure. And then, of course, it led to a whole variety of different activities. The design of the buildings, or some of the buildings, has changed over time. It's certainly one of the most popular holiday attractions in Eastbourne. And it's interesting to note that British seaside piers are almost unique in the world. In fact, I only know of one other, and that's in Belgium. So we're very lucky in this country to have these lovely seaside piers that don't really exist in other parts of the world. And when you're actually on the seafront, you sometimes see people from other countries taking lots of photographs of the pier because they've never seen anything like it before. So we ought to, I suppose, take care of the treasure that we have right in our hometown and give it all the credit that it deserves. So that is a short story of the pier, and good luck in all your learning, and thank you for listening.